Okay, so just as a preamble, I'll just give you an introduction to some ideas in photography and architecture, and then we'll move on and talk about some just interesting projects that were in that we photographed and how we kind of came up with the ideas for the different projects. So William Fox Talbot's photograph of Laycock Abbey in 1839 is held up as the primary evidence of the unshakable link between architecture and photography. Indeed, in the formative years of photography's emergence, architecture was a consistent, immutable subject of choice. The early photographic practice demanded time and money, so the majority of views were conducted by aristocratic amateurs. This accounts for the predominance of the country house views, as the camera and photo album supplanted the paint box and the sketchbook. For architects, truth and photography were seen as interlinked and inevitable. Sir John Robison, an architect and a friend of William Fox Talbot, praised photography, concluding that it offered accurate views of architecture. Indeed, Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc agreed that photography offered indisputable reports, and Building News in England stated that the truth of representation, like Caesar's wife, can never be suspected. At that time, photography offered a way to record and survey. In France, photography was used to record architecture on large scales. This was because it was unencumbered by patent disputes that marred the uptake elsewhere. Some notable projects, such as the Mission Héliographique in 1851, the first instance of state patronage of photography, was aimed to make a photographic inventory of the architectural heritage as a prelude to accurate repair. This project had emerged from earlier large-scale archival projects. Viollet-le-Duc also contributed to those, and they were meant to be carried out with lithography. Photography's development coincides with a more scientific attitude to architectural study, with an emphasis on pictorial truth emphasized by architects, again, Viollet-le-Duc. However, the idea of neutral scientific survey of France's heritage was not manifest in the mission. One of the photographers, Gustave Le Gray, admitted, by varying focus and exposure times, the artist can emphasize or sacrifice parts that he wants, and depending on how he feels, go from the extremes of powerful shadow and light to the effects of softness and suavidity in the same site and subject. Although there is a promise of neutral observation, even at this early stage, it's evident that photography was not neutral. Photographers such as they're called the Besson Frères, the Besson brothers, exemplify a less picturesque approach. So that's Gustave Le Gray, that's Carcassonne, and this is the Besson Frères. The Besson brothers undermined the picturesque, and they were in tune with the French modes of architectural representation, providing large-scale, detailed representations of Gothic details and described as clear, rigorous, sharp. This class of French photography was used to disseminate information. So what I'd like to point out that, like at a very early stage in photography, we get this kind of split where you have scientific truth on one side, and then you have the artistic and picturesque on the other side. And it's something that persists through photography's history. And it's quite an interesting thing that at both times in any photograph, both ideas can exist. Okay. So this is a very famous photograph that would show the power of the image to create an architecture. This is Mies van der Rohe's Friedrichstraßen. And Mies is the master of taking a program and converting it into an image. And if you look at that image, there are so many, that's the persistent image of the modern office block. That's created over 100 years old, so that's 1920s. And yet we still have that persistent image of the office block. So photography and architecture are intertwined, both in the creation of architecture, in the examples of Mies van der Rohe, and the recording of it, and the understanding of it. Okay. So just to talk about the project itself. So the photographic approach was that it would be a neutral survey documenting the present condition. So things weren't moved around. It documented things like the services, the materials, the principal spaces, the construction details. One thing that we were able to do a lot of times with the case studies was to photograph interiors, which usually proves very difficult. Another thing that we were able to do was focus on the campus and the environment. So a lot of times when you see photographs of buildings, even published in magazines or on websites, they exclude the context and the environment. That may have been something that was designed, and I'll show you some examples later on. Access was generally given. The building owners in general were extremely helpful, and that could be a resident or a caretaker, maintenance people. They usually knew the history of the buildings. Okay. So then, at the beginning of the survey, this was 2011, what we did was we set up a database of, based on the Docomomo fiche, and used that to input information. And each record was given a record number, because quite often names would change. Something like gallery number 1 is Castle Street, or the IFC is known as the IFI. So things like that. We started out with 200 outline surveys, of which there was 20 case studies, and that expanded to 329. And there's about 2,000 photographs overall. That's reduced from, that was edited down from maybe if you were doing a case study, it might be 50 to 100, and that would be reduced down to maybe 15 to 20 representative images. So the way the database was designed was that the outline surveys could be expanded into a full survey at any time. So I just picked these projects because I think they're interesting and quite representative of what went on in the project, as opposed to what you'll see in the books, okay? And the idea with choosing the projects was that they were representative of landscapes, buildings in Dublin, modern landscapes and modern buildings in Dublin. So there was a clear effort not to make it a best of, the top 20 modern buildings in Dublin. So, which gives you oblates. So if you don't know oblates, it's on the Tierney Road. And I'll just refer to my notes here. So the grotto and Marian shrine closely modelled on the grotto in Lourdes. It is somewhat secluded on the Tierney Road. It is masked by an external boundary. But once you walk in, there's this amazing grotto. The grotto is interesting as a devotional religious landscape and also as a community-created project. So it was built by local people under the guidance of some priests, and this is what they created. And it's a really interesting structure. And if we look at these pictures, I mean, they are amazing, really, really fantastic works of art in a way. So then I thought Drumcondra Library, this is quite an interesting building in its own right, but what I think is interesting about this was that it was developed by Robert Lowry, 1937, and it's one of a multiple of libraries that are situated around Dublin. Ringsend has one, Drumcondra has one. And it was designed so that it could be placed anywhere, regardless of orientation. So this is why you get these fantastic corner windows. And it's a really, and also what's interesting is it's using quite unostentatious material. It's just render and brick, and yet it's creating like a really fantastic interior. It's very well maintained. It's really used by the community. This particular one in Drumcondra, it's in a really great location beside Griffith Park. What's interesting about this as well, and they were very helpful, is that the furniture is built in, so you can see the cupboards opening up, and that that conceals the services. All the radiators are built into the joinery. So, Clontarf Promenade. These public amenities are wonderful examples of Herbert Simms' simple, elegant, and economic designs. The bull wall shelters stand as a testament to robust public designs and are a gift to the city. The Housing and City Architects Department was responsible for design at Clontarf. They reached completion in 1958. The inclusion in the inventory marks these structures as an important part of the fabric of the city. Again, we try to avoid, your 20 best modern buildings. Just as a set of little pavilions, they're really interesting. I think that's one of the things that the inventory does as well, the 20th Century Survey, is it compiles all these things together so that you can look at them as a set of objects. This is one of my favourite buildings. This is Mount Carmel on King's Inn Street. And this is 1941, William Byrne. It's extremely sophisticated. So this is the corridor here that we see. It's lit from either side with glazing, so it's getting borrowed light from the classrooms. The classrooms are really well designed. It's got playgrounds on the roof because of the constrained site. The brickwork is absolutely amazing. It uses these fired bricks, and they're in a chevron, a cross pattern, and all the services are in trenches in the floor. You can see that picture on the lower right-hand corner where you have the little brass caps that you can lift up the trenches. So 1940s, like really building in a really sophisticated way, and I nearly forgot the main point. That corridor is actually ventilated from a plenum, and you can see the ventilation grills in the classroom on the lower right-hand corner. So it's using cross-ventilation to ventilate the corridor. So it's really these buildings are quite sophisticated for their time. So then, moving on to more sophistication, College of Domestic Economy, this is Robinson and Keefe. Another example of where you've got the services. This is quite an interesting building as well. It's using reinforced concrete, and then you've got this grand staircase, and as you can see in the lower right-hand corner, you've got the ventilation system. But what's interesting is it's this crossover between early modernism and almost like classical mannerism. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, you can see the back elevation of the stair, that grand stair. And what you'll notice is that there's a gap, and that's where the ventilation goes up. You can see a recess in the windows where the windows are level with the stairs on the inside, but are recessed on the outside, so this ventilation can go up. So it's a quite sophisticated way where the external walls come in and come out. And French Mullen House. This is an early example of Michael Scott's influence by Gropius. What's interesting here is in the photographs, this is demolished, but it records all of the coal chutes. And then the gastro-urinary building on Mead Street. And what's interesting about that, again, is the services and the terrazzo that was introduced by Devan. We were very lucky on the day we were allowed up onto the terraces, which were to be used for, getting air and things like that. So again, just to emphasize, the building owners and the building maintenance people a lot of the time were very helpful in this regard, to give us access to the buildings. Again, this is another Andy Devan building. One of the things about this is that the campus is fully intact. Amazing detailing in the church. It's a really fantastic campus. You go around the church, and there's a promenade down. And then I'll just move on. So this is Bord Fáilte. And I suppose when you look at these images, you really see the use of the survey. So Bord Fáilte was demolished, but we still have a record of some of the details. Even though it was built for a very low budget, in the images you can see the Georgian terrace that Robin Walker refers to. You can see that they put in little skirtings, metal skirtings at the base where plugs are plugged in. So quite an unusual detail for the 60s. And then moving on to Foss. Just some more images there. I think this is a really excellent project. It's almost like a landscape project up in Finglas. The interior, which is brilliant. And then another project that I think shows the benefit of the survey. So this is Herbert Mews by de Block and Meyer. And these gardens around the buildings, they're actually communal. And so by recording these, we can record them in their current state. We were very lucky, we got full access into the Mews. And this is a building that many people wouldn't really know that well, but it's kind of emblematic of Irish architecture in the 80s. You know, you've got your quite modest materials, but really well designed, really quite exciting spaces for what they are. You know, they're like building in a totally different way on a really confined site. Okay, so I just thought I'd show this because this is gone as well, but it's the IDA buildings, and they were removed, but again, people may not have known about those. And so just to finish up, the project was very wide in its scope, covering many buildings. It allows comparative analysis and also chronological analysis. It records failures and successes, records the context and environment, and it works very much in tandem with research. The way we did it was we went in pairs into the buildings. Okay, and thanks very much for that. That's all.